So where does Foster's novel come into play with all this historical backdrop and all these kinds of things? Well, it's a textbook example of the subgenre that I was telling you about, of course, and just about all of the elements that you would expect are there. First of all, one of the ways that these early novels tried to get around sort of the puritanical objections of the time was that they say, it may be a novel, but it's founded in fiction. It's founded on fact. It's a true life story based on a true story kind of thing, right? So that would get people to, and in this case, it certainly was. It would get people to sort of maybe somewhat accept fiction a little bit more if they thought it was founded on fact. So it was a dramatization, if you will, of a big hot news story. This particular novel was based on the case of Elizabeth Whitman, not Wharton. Eliza Wharton is based on Elizabeth Whitman. She was an upper-class young woman who ends up at a rather seedy inn, I think it's outside of Boston, about to deliver a child, and she was the daughter of a very prominent minister whose family sort of ran in rather lofty circles. She shows up at an inn one night and says, "I'm here to meet my husband." And of course, everybody thought, well, we don't think that would be very likely here. Why would you be meeting up with your husband when you're this pregnant and you, etc.? So she then goes into labor, and both she and the child die in childbirth. True story, as far as we can tell. It certainly was, and it was a very, very popular story. Now, people having relations outside of wedlock and even all of these kinds of things, that was not terribly uncommon at the time. In fact, at a certain point, I believe it was in the 1780s, 1790s, something like about a third to 40% of all children in the Northeast were born outside of wedlock. Not quite as scandalous as you might think. There was this thing called common law marriage. People living way out in the boonies didn't have access to church weddings kind of thing. But there was an awful lot of it, and it just was, but this particular case, because of who she was, because of her class, remember that, drew a lot of attention in the news. The shocking aspect of the case, if you will, was the social class that she came from. In other words, the actual facts of the case really aren't terribly well known, mostly because it became the subject of rumor and conjecture, and this kind of gets mixed in with sort of some of the fact. But this was enough for Foster to decide to pick it up and kind of run with it. And out of wedlock births were common, as I said, but they weren't common for upper class young women of education and means. And that's why the Eliza Wharton, Elizabeth Whitman story is so scandalous and so interesting to a lot of people. What happens to common folk maybe doesn't make the news, but if the same thing happens to somebody who should be farther up the social ladder is. So, contemporary tales surrounding the Whitman case warned that the wayward young woman had read too much fiction. Okay, there you go. She read novels, and that's why she did all these things. She turned her head, and she made her lose her head by all the romantic claptrap of fiction and junk. Woe unto you, female readers of novels. So in some sense, Foster's using the Whitman case to actually defend the novel's usefulness and come to the novel's rescue is a part of the agenda here. Foster seems sort of to be refuting the charge, if you will, that novels are what led to this sort of downfall, and that instead novels can prevent this kind of thing from happening. You be the judge. But that was the common thing. Oh, she read too many novels, and that's why she, had an affair with a married man and all this kind of stuff, because all that romanticism and everything. So in some ways, I think Foster's trying to sort of save the reputation of the genre, the new genre. Of course, there's the element of seduction in here, and I do my little church lady impersonation. Well, that's special, but I think I'm too old, and that's too old too. So you guys probably wouldn't get it. That was 30 years ago. But the Major Sanford figure certainly is the dashing young man with the military background and that kind of thing. Lucy is the goody-goody who warns Eliza, oh no, don't do this, don't do this. Twice Eliza is given a chance for a normal boring life. First with Haley, I guess it's Haley or Hallie. I don't know how you would pronounce it. And then possibly with Boyer, but neither is good enough for her, evidently. With Boyer, she just gets caught kind of flirting with Sanford, and he's had enough. He's got his misgivings to begin with. Notice the pairs of characters. I think that's really important. Dayton is to Sanford what Lucy is to Eliza, not on a moral basis, but kind of in a relative sense, right? That's kind of a sidekick kind of person. These characters sort of attempt to moderate, at least to some extent, the passions of Sanford and Eliza, but it doesn't do much good. There's several steps down the path to seduction in this novel. You go, one step, then another, then another. Every time they push the envelope a little bit more, and it's supposed to build tension, and the reader, who's supposed to be a goody two-shoes herself, is like, oh, don't do that. No, don't do that. Oh, don't answer him back. No, you'll just lead him on. Oh, this is so dangerous. Oh, look what they're doing now. That kind of stuff. And at many different points, they could pull back from this and turn the other way, but they don't. Her later rejection, Eliza's later rejection of Boyer, and admittedly a boring but sensitive young minister who gets introduced to Eliza by the Richmonds, is one step along the way. A third major mistake that Eliza makes is that she believes that she can turn this guy from being a bad boy into somebody good. This is really bad news. Never. You all have friends who are dating bad boys, and then you're like, this is not going to work out. We can see that happening. He's not going to reform, and she's not going to be the reformer. She kind of quickly learns that. After a hiatus of about a year, Sanford has married another woman, and there we go, but she still is drawn to him like a moth to the flame kind of thing, to use a cliche. He mostly married her for money. Sound familiar? That's exactly what we saw in Charlotte Temple. And really, her half-hearted relationship with Emmons is not going to be enough to prevent her from the numerous rendezvous in the garden that she's going to have with Sanford. You can see this coming. It's like, that's not going to work. You don't get to watch the passionate love scene. No, we can't have that. You have to just turn the page, and then one more By the way, this is an epistolary form, and it was very, it's as though you went and opened a trunk and found all these letters and read about it after the fact. The letter that finally reveals that, oops, she's pregnant, you don't get to see. I mean, nobody, writes the letter about the passionate encounter that led to the pregnancy. You can't go that far with this genre. That'll get you banned. But I know you were hoping for it, you naughty people, but you don't get that letter. That letter's missing. All right, if it was written at all. The third thing that kind of pops out that makes this in that tradition is the moral retribution and the didacticism that's there. It's a little hard for us to fathom the fact that, in addition to feeling considerable sympathy for Eliza, most readers would see her death as a just retribution for her transgressions. I mean, we just find like, you deserve a death sentence for having. I mean, adultery shouldn't be. I think we stopped stoning people for that a long time ago. No one condones what she does. I mean, I wouldn't. But at the same time, you and I probably would say, gee, death is pretty harsh for that. Let's try to make the best of a bad situation. But at the time, the readers would say, no, I mean, that's actually a fitting end. It's a sad, sad end. It's terribly sad. I feel so badly for her. Lots of tears would have been wept by your average 15-year-old reading this novel. But they would not probably have thought it was a bad thing that she paid that way. I think, anyway, that's my guess. Foster, for her part, is able to sort of illustrate the slow, inevitable decline of Eliza. And in doing that, we feel this sense of dread, this sense of sympathy, and also disapproval, all kind of mixed into one, which is kind of an interesting thing when she makes all these different choices. But most of us don't really feel the same degree of deep moral outrage at her flagrant disregard of social standards and moral standards. Foster's readers probably would. They would probably say, well, she got what she had coming to her, but it's sad that she had it coming to her, and she shouldn't have done it. Now, what I really want to do is focus on this last point here as a commentary and get you thinking about this a little bit more. First of all, I'm going to point out down at the bottom right there on this. This is a great sort of I won't say primitive. It's not primitive. It's a step up from that, a painting from the era John Lewis Crimmel's Barroom Dancing. And the reason I like this painting is that it depicts sort of a cross section of society, different people from different classes. If you'll notice, really carefully doing sort of different things, people taking it. So you have the couple that's dancing in the middle, and they're probably upper class, and you can tell by their dress and their manners that they're doing things. You got drunkards, and you got the working class woman who's smoking a pipe there, and you got a couple making out, and watch the guy's hands. You got an old man there, African American guy playing the fiddle. So it's supposed to be this sort of cross sections that a pub or an inn or a bar would be where you could find people of all different stations and whatnot. So it's kind of an interesting piece, and it's what the country was coming to terms with at the time. We're not going to be a stratified, segregated in terms of class society. We're going to be a society where people of different classes, backgrounds, ethnicities, countries, religions are going to mix and mingle. So how do we handle this, right? But also the big thing that the novel is dealing with is the question of freedom. So the question after the revolution is, okay, we fought for all these rights and all this kind of thing, and we set up a constitution, and it's a republican form of government. All of this is really problematic, because the question is, will all of this liberty turn into libertinism, right? And libertinism, of course, is just basically lawlessness. And to you and I, we think, no, it's a government of checks and balances, right? We got the advantage of sort of hindsight there. We look at a system that, with all of its flaws and everything, and the fact that it wasn't extended to everyone at all by any means, it was actually a fairly good first start at trying to get something that would lead to the elevation of everybody. Eventually, we like to think so as Americans, certainly, is that while, it certainly wasn't all inclusive, it was a good first step in the right direction. As the fellow from Hamilton once famously said, America is a great unfinished symphony. And so that first note or two that made the point that people ought to have greater freedom is something that was a step in the right direction, and it's our job to continue to extend the blessings of liberty, if you will, to everyone. But at the time, it was, have we made a huge mistake here? We have unleashed the beast. So there were a lot of problems. And one of the things that, of course, that conversation focused on very acutely is what will the new Republican, again, I'm not talking about the Republican Party, right? Okay, I'm talking about the Republic, okay? Because we live in a republic. People think it's a democracy. It's a republic that adheres to certain democratic principles, as opposed to, say, an oligarchy or a monarchy or whatever other archy you want. It's a republic. We live in a republic. And so the question was, what will this new Republican woman be like? And what will the family be like in this new republic? So this is a novel about freedom and the dangers of freedom in some respects, right? What will happen to the country if young women decide to just make their own choices, live their own way, not heed the advice of parents and prudent friends and ministers, and so what happens to young women who are out of control in respects? The Jacksonian administration will be some people's worst nightmares. I think this is, to some extent, fosters appealing even to the upper classes' fears, or exploiting their fears, but also giving a cautionary tale. I don't see her as saying that the sympathy that we should feel for Eliza should rest on our sympathy, if we have any, which we wouldn't have as her readers, for her choices. She's actually telling us these are terrible choices. She's actually telling us that the Elizas of the world, girls who are brought up in good families by ministers' daughters, as ministers' daughters, or who are given education, should be making better choices than this. And that if we're not careful, we're going to live in a society that gives women free license to indulge in whatever whim they feel like. I really think it's a fairly conservative novel in that respect. I think it's very racy and cutting edge for its era, for dealing with the topic, but I don't think it deals with the topic in a way that is anything other than very much admonishing people to be careful, and particularly. So I don't think you can remove the social and political backdrop here of this novel taking place right after the Revolution in the early years of the Republic, and the very big unanswered question of what kind of country have we created here? What kind of people are we going to be soon? And particularly, what kind of young women are we going to have? I'm just going to kick that out there because I think that's really a part of what the novel is about. Certainly, Kathy Davidson's written a lot on that, and I don't think she's quite underscored that aspect as much as I think deserves to be, but perhaps she has in other places. Anyway, I think it's worthy of discussion. I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say about certain aspects of it, and I'll have an update for our syllabus as well that goes along with this.